She said he was just a friend. So I waited and watched until the day she kissed him while I was still holding her hand. I used to think cheating meant a motel room, lipstick on the collar, or some cliché scene out of a bad drama. But what I learned is that emotional betrayal is quieter. It's a slow bleed, not a gunshot. No screams. No slammed doors. Just a growing silence between two people who used to know everything about each other. My name's Eric. I'm 36. And I was married to Lena for 7 years. We were solid, or so I thought. Not perfect, but solid in the way people are after they've weathered some storms. She was smart, empathetic, good with people. I always admired that about her, how she could make someone feel like the most important person in the room. I used to think I was lucky to be that person, until I wasn't. It started with a new job. Lena took a communications role at a nonprofit downtown, one of those feel-good, change-the-world places with open floor plans and espresso machines. I was proud of her. She'd been stuck in a dead-end job for too long. She lit up when she talked about it. About her team. About him. Mark said the funniest thing today. Mark had this idea during the meeting. Mark told me I'd be great at presenting it. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I'd heard his name enough to know he was part of her daily orbit. A teammate. A mentor. Maybe. But then there was that dinner. We were out celebrating our anniversary. Candlelight. Wine. A rare moment alone without phones or deadlines. She was telling me a story about something that happened at work. I was listening, smiling, but then I noticed something. She said instead of the team dot. We decided to rework the pitch deck. We stayed late to get it right. I asked, gently, who's we? She hesitated, just for a second. Oh, Mark and I. Just us two. Everyone else had already left. I didn't say anything, just filed it away. But something shifted after that. She started staying later. Not absurdly late, just enough to raise eyebrows, not alarms. When she got home, she'd be tired but wired. Phone in hand, screen turned away from me. Always smiling at something. One night I asked, everything okay with us? She looked confused. What do you mean? I don't know. You seem distant lately. She kissed me then. Softly. Said, it's just work. It's been intense. You know how I get when I'm in a groove. And I did. I knew that look in her eyes when she was locked into something, building momentum. But I didn't know this version. The one who laughed at texts I didn't see. The one who had inside jokes with someone I'd never met. That's when I made a choice. I didn't accuse. I didn't beg for reassurance. I just started watching. Not like a spy. Not like some controlling partner, but like someone who's finally realized the ground beneath his feet might not be as solid as he thought. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up. Mark, can't stop thinking about what you said today. I didn't open it. Didn't need to. My stomach did a full rotation on its own. She came out, towel around her hair, humming something. Saw me sitting on the edge of the bed, still. I asked, what did you say today that stuck with him? She froze, just for a breath, then smiled like it was nothing. Oh, probably about the pitch. I gave him some feedback. He gets dramatic. I nodded. Let it pass. But I didn't sleep that night. Not because I thought she was sleeping with him, but because I realized I no longer trusted her version of the truth. And once that starts, you start seeing everything differently. I started asking myself questions I didn't want the answers to. Would she tell me if it ever crossed a line? Was she already rationalizing things in her head? Did she miss him when she was with me? The worst part? I still loved her. Still looked at her the way I used to. Still reached for her in the mornings. Still wanted to believe this was a phase. That I was overthinking it. But love doesn't survive in denial. It suffocates there. So I decided to find out the truth. Not by catching her in some act, but by giving her the room to be honest. To show me who she really was when she thought I wasn't watching. I didn't confront her right away. That would have been too easy. And in hindsight, too soon. Instead, I gave her rope. enough of it to see whether she'd use it to climb back or hang the last thread of trust we had left. I started keeping track, not like a detective, but like a man who's already been lied to and is just trying to understand the shape of it. I watched how often her phone was face down. I noticed how she started leaving rooms to take certain calls. Sometimes, she'd walk in the door still talking to him, laughing, like the world outside was more alive than the one she came home to. And then came the shock. It was a Tuesday, late March, one of those forgettable weekdays when everything changes. She'd mentioned that morning she might be home late, something about team drinks, a last-minute celebration for closing a grant. I told her, have fun, and meant it, at least on the surface. I even offered to pick her up if she drank too much. She declined, said she'd take a rideshare. I nodded and smiled like a husband who trusted his wife. But I didn't go home after work that night. Instead, I drove downtown, parked 2 blocks from her office. I knew the place they liked, she'd mentioned it enough. Cozy little gastropub with string lights and wood beams. The kind of place you don't just accidentally end up at. I waited. At 6:37 p.m., I saw her walk in. She wasn't with her team. She was with him. Just him. He was tall, confident in that laid-back way that comes from knowing you're someone people like. She smiled at him the way she used to smile at me, leaning in, eyes soft, like the world faded away when he spoke. They sat in a booth in the back, the kind made for intimacy. I watched from across the street, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I couldn't hear what they said, but I didn't need to. I watched her tuck her hair behind her ear the way she always did when she wanted to be seen. Watched him reach across the table and touch her hand. It wasn't long. 15 seconds, maybe. But that was all I needed. 15 seconds that collapsed 7 years of marriage. I left. Didn't confront them. Didn't storm in like a madman. I drove home in silence, hands clenched so tight around the wheel I could feel my knuckles ache. I sat in the driveway for a full hour before I went inside. She came home at 9:12 p.m. Said the drinks ran long. I asked, good turnout. She nodded. Yeah, whole team was there. It was fun. She was lying and didn't even flinch. That hurt more than anything. The next day, I started looking through old photos. Us at the lake. Her leaning against my shoulder. Me cooking while she danced in the kitchen. I wanted to remember if I'd missed something or if she'd really changed. Or maybe she'd never really been who I thought she was. I remembered something her sister once told me half drunk at our wedding, whispering it like a warning disguised as a compliment. She gets bored easy. Just keep her entertained. I thought it was a joke. Now I wasn't so sure. But here's the twist, the part that shocked even me, and I was living it. A week later, her phone buzzed while she was in the shower. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But I did. It wasn't from Mark. It was from his wife. Claire, Mark's wife. I think we need to talk. My blood ran cold. I messaged her back, pretending to be Lena. Me? About what? She replied almost instantly. Claire, you know what? Meet me tomorrow. 6 p.m. Cafe Wilder. No lies this time. I stared at the message for what felt like years. My heart was beating out of my chest. It wasn't just me. Someone else saw it too. Someone who knew. The next day, I showed up. Not Lena. Me. Claire was already sitting at a table, black coat draped over the chair, no makeup, just raw and tired. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Her hands were trembling around a mug of tea. When she saw me, her face went pale. You're not. I'm Lena's husband, I said. You messaged her. I figured it was time someone told the truth. She stared at me, blinked twice, then let out a dry, bitter laugh. Oh my God, she whispered. They really thought we'd never find out. We sat there for an hour. She told me everything. It had started with texts, just like I thought. Supportive coworkers. Encouraging late-night conversations. Work stress turned personal. Then flirtation. Then, according to Claire, It hadn't gone physical yet, but she'd found Lena's name in his phone under a fake contact. She'd seen a text Mark sent to her that said, "I can't stop thinking about your mouth." Claire was shattered. I was silent. We sat there, two strangers connected by a betrayal that neither of us had asked for. Before we parted ways, she looked at me and said, "I don't know what you're going to do with this, but I know I can't stay with someone who wants someone else." I nodded. Me neither. I drove home that night with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't about whether they'd slept together. Not anymore. It was about intimacy. About where she chose to put her affection, her attention, her energy. It wasn't in our marriage anymore. She came home an hour later, humming to herself. She kissed my cheek. Told me she missed me that day. I smiled and started planning my exit. Not out of rage. Not for revenge. But because I refused to beg someone to choose me while they were already choosing someone else. People always assume the worst moment is the reveal, the confrontation. But it's not. It's the waiting. It's watching the person you love lie to your face day after day while they don't know that you know. That's the moment that hollowed me out more than anything she could have confessed. I didn't confront Lena after the dinner. I didn't even tell her I saw them. I just came home, sat in the kitchen with the lights off, and stared at the floor until her key turned in the lock 3 hours later. She kissed my cheek, called me babe, and said her team was chaotic but sweet. I just nodded and asked if she wanted tea. The next few weeks became a study in performance, hers and mine. She kept acting like everything was fine. Wore her hair curled more often. Bought new perfume. Started using a different body wash, one I didn't recognize. All while telling me about meetings and timelines and impossible deadlines. But never about Mark. She didn't say his name once after that night. Almost like she was scrubbing him from her vocabulary. Like his existence was too radioactive to touch. That silence said more than any words could. Meanwhile, I was gathering proof. Quietly. Cautiously. I wasn't interested in catching her in some explosive act. I wanted patterns. I needed to understand what I was looking at, not a moment of weakness, but a relationship. And it was becoming clear that's what this was. She had developed a second emotional life. A life that didn't involve me. I started keeping small notes, nothing obsessive, just timestamps and inconsistencies. Tuesday. Said she was working late, but came home in full makeup and the same heels she wore to our anniversary dinner. Friday. Claimed an all-team brainstorm session, but came back with the smell of red wine on her breath. It's not that she was bad at lying. It's that she had stopped trying to be good at it. There was one night, early April, that nearly broke me. She was sitting on the edge of our bed, back to me, scrolling through her phone. I caught a glimpse of her smile in the mirror. Not a big one. Just that soft curve people make when they're immersed in a moment that feels just for them. Then I heard the ping. I stayed quiet. Listened to her type. Stop. Type again. I asked, from behind her, "You texting Jill?" She hesitated for half a beat too long. "Yeah. She's venting about her ex again." I nodded. "Tell her I said good luck." She didn't look at me. Just kept typing. A few minutes later, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking as I sat on the toilet lid, breathing slow and shallow. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to be cheating, or if I just wanted a reason to stop feeling like a ghost in my own home. That weekend, I did something I'm not proud of. I installed a location tracker on her phone. Not a spy app. Nothing illegal. Just something I could check when the alibis started stacking too high. It was wrong, I know. But if you've never sat across from someone who tells you they love you while hiding everything behind their eyes, then you don't know what that kind of desperation feels like. I told myself I'd only use it if things got worse. And then they did. The following Thursday, she said she was going to a networking event after work. One of those mixers with cheap wine and name tags. She even sent me a selfie in the office bathroom, subtle makeup, understated dress, the kind of effort you make when you want to impress someone specific. I checked the tracker an hour later. She wasn't at the venue. She was 2 miles away, in a neighborhood filled with boutique restaurants and mid-tier hotels. I didn't drive there, didn't call, didn't text. I just sat with that information like a stone in my stomach. She came home around 10:30 p.m., smiling, giggly, said she'd met someone who might want to collaborate on a crossword campaign. She poured herself a glass of wine, slipped off her heels, and curled up next to me on the couch. I watched her finish the glass, watched her lean into me like she'd never broken a single promise. And I realized then, this wasn't a slip. This was a choice, a routine. She wasn't cheating on me. She'd simply moved on with me still in the room. The next day, I called in sick. Took time to clear my head. I drove to the outskirts of the city and sat in a diner where no one knew me, nursing a bad cup of coffee and wondering what the hell I was supposed to do with all this. I couldn't talk to my friends. Half of them had always envied what Lena and I had. The other half wouldn't know what to say. I considered calling Claire again. I hadn't spoken to her since the initial message. She hadn't followed up, and I hadn't reached out. Maybe she had gotten what she needed. Or maybe, like me, she was still trying to understand what pieces could be salvaged. But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, because part of me still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was an explanation. Something that would make it all make sense. Something that didn't end with me sleeping alone in an empty house. That weekend, Lena suggested we go away together. A spontaneous couples weekend. Her idea. She booked a cabin in the woods, just far enough from everything. She said she missed me. Said we needed a reset. I said yes. Because I needed something, too. A clear decision. The trip is next week. If she's hiding anything, if this relationship with Mark is more than just texts and glances, I'll know. One way or another, I'll know. I just don't know what I'll do with that truth when it finally stands in front of me. The drive to the cabin was quiet. Not tense, just careful. Like we were both trying to avoid breaking something that neither of us had the tools to fix. Lena played soft music and stared out the window most of the way. Every now and then, she'd reach over and touch my arm, as if checking to see if I was still real. "I'm glad we're doing this," she said once, voice low. I didn't respond, just nodded and kept my eyes on the road. The cabin itself was beautiful, rustic but updated. Wood beams, big windows, a fireplace, and the kind of stillness you don't realize you miss until it wraps around you. We unpacked without talking much. She poured wine. I built a fire. And for a while, we sat on opposite ends of the couch, sipping quietly, pretending this was just a normal weekend away. But it wasn't. It was a test. And we both knew it. I'd come here prepared for war, emotionally if nothing else. I'd been waiting for the perfect moment to ask her the one question she hadn't prepared an answer for. Are you in love with him? But what happened instead wasn't what I expected. That night, after dinner, we were sitting out on the deck. The stars were visible in a way they never are in the city. Lena leaned into me, wrapped in a blanket, her head on my shoulder. For a second, it felt like the version of us from 3 years ago. And that's what made it so much worse. Because I knew it wasn't real. Or at least, it wasn't complete. Do you ever think about how we started? She asked suddenly. I looked down at her. What do you mean? She hesitated. You were still technically seeing someone when we first kissed. Remember? That stopped me cold. I hadn't thought about Mia in years. We'd only been dating a few months when I met Lena. I was already pulling away. Mia and I were fizzling. Lena had felt like a spark in a dim room. She'd known I wasn't completely single. I told myself I was emotionally checked out, that it didn't really count. But Lena had remembered. I think about it sometimes, she said, not accusing, just reflective. How easily things can start in the gray areas. How clean we like to pretend the beginnings are. I said nothing. She turned toward me then, I searching. You think I'm in love with him, don't you? There it was. I wanted to say yes. Wanted to throw everything I'd seen back in her face. The messages, the dinner, the hotel neighborhood. But her eyes stopped me. They weren't smug or cornered. They were sad, tired, like she was grieving something before I even had a chance to bury it. "I think you've fallen out of love with me," I said. She closed her eyes and whispered, "That's not the same thing." I stood up, walked back into the cabin. I didn't want to keep going down that road because I knew where it led, to a place where her choices started looking like something other than betrayal. And I wasn't ready for that yet. The next day, it rained. She stayed inside reading while I walked the trails behind the cabin. I couldn't think clearly in the same room with her. Not when her voice still sounded like home. I needed distance. Even if it was just trees and mud and the sound of water dripping through leaves. When I got back, she was sitting on the floor with an old photo album open in her lap. Not our album. One she must have packed without telling me. Childhood pictures. Her parents. A brother I'd only met once. "Did you know I used to sleep with the closet light on until I was 15, she said. I shook my head. She flipped a page. "I used to hear my parents arguing in the kitchen. Late. After they thought I was asleep. My dad had this way of apologizing that always sounded like a threat." I sat down across from her. "Why are you telling me this?" She looked up. "Because I'm not going to lie anymore." I waited. She closed the album. "Yes, Mark and I got close. Yes, it went too far. And no, I haven't told you everything." Her hands were trembling. "But the thing you don't understand, Eric, the thing I didn't understand either, is that this didn't start with him. It started with me. Years ago." I said nothing. Just listened. I thought I was broken. I'd wake up and feel this hole inside me, and I thought it was your fault. That maybe you'd changed. Maybe we'd changed. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared that I could have something real and still feel so empty. She looked away. And Mark didn't feel it either. Not really. He just distracted me from it. And I let him. I sat there, frozen. Not because I forgave her. Not because it suddenly made sense. But because, for the first time, I saw that her betrayal hadn't been about him. It had been about her. And maybe about me too. Because I had noticed her changing long before Mark ever existed. I'd watched her retreat, get quieter, more restless. And I didn't ask. I didn't dig. I didn't want to know what she'd say. I just assumed she'd come back when she was ready. But people don't come back when they think no one noticed them leaving. She reached across the floor, hand open. "I know I don't get to ask you for anything, but I'm asking anyway. Please don't let this be the end without understanding what really ended first." And I'll admit it. For the first time, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I'd come here to confirm what I already suspected. I'd come to expose her, punish her, maybe even leave her. Instead, she'd handed me a version of the truth I hadn't planned for. One where she wasn't a villain, just a deeply flawed person who'd looked for herself in someone else, and lost both. I went outside and sat on the wet stairs of the cabin, hands buried in my hair. I didn't cry. I just sat. Because the worst betrayal isn't the one you suffer. It's the one you understand. We left the cabin late Sunday morning. The sky was overcast, the road slick from an early drizzle that hadn't fully burned off. Lena wanted to stop somewhere for brunch, said it felt like a waste to just drive straight home. I agreed, mostly because I was afraid of what would happen when we returned to real life. The cabin had been neutral ground. Home meant decisions. She picked the place. Small town. Artsy. The kind of main street that looked curated for Instagram, brick sidewalks, hanging flower baskets, boutiques selling candles, and overpriced linen. We parked and walked a few blocks, her hand slipping into mine like we were still okay. "Let's check the gallery before we eat," she said, pointing to a small storefront across from the cafe she'd found online. I said sure, because I didn't care about the gallery. I was watching her. It was like she had relaxed overnight. Her smile wasn't tight anymore. She wasn't watching her phone as much. I should have felt hopeful. Instead, I felt dread. Calm like that doesn't come from resolution. It comes from surrender. We stepped inside the gallery. Local photography. Black and white prints of the surrounding mountains, a series of close-ups on old hands and weathered wood. She wandered ahead, pausing at a photo of a broken dock disappearing into a lake. I stayed a few steps behind. Then I saw him. Mark. He was across the street, standing near the front patio of the cafe Lena had picked for brunch. Dressed casual, backpack slung over one shoulder, phone in his hand. I knew his face from the LinkedIn photo I'd found weeks ago, but seeing him live was like seeing a ghost that wasn't supposed to exist in daylight. I froze. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe he just happened to be in town. Maybe he was here for work. But no, he wasn't from this area. His office was over 40 miles away. He didn't have family nearby. There was only one reason he'd be here. He was meeting her. I turned to Lena. She hadn't seen him yet. So I watched. She checked her phone, smiled, turned toward the gallery exit and started walking toward the street. I didn't follow. I stayed just inside, behind the glare of the window, where she couldn't see me. I saw her cross the street, briskly, like she knew where she was going. And then it happened. She stepped up to him, looked around once, not cautious, just aware. And then she kissed him. Not a peck, not a cheek graze. A slow, familiar kiss. The kind you don't give someone for the first time in public unless it's been happening behind closed doors for a long time. My throat went dry. The air left my lungs. They stood close. She touched his chest, said something I couldn't hear. He laughed, ran a hand down her arm. And just like that, they turned and walked inside the cafe. I didn't move. I didn't rush out or cause a scene. I just stood there, watching people walk past me, oblivious. No one knew a life was ending 10 feet from where they bought scented soap and pastries. I left before they could see me. I walked to the car, got in, and sat with my hands on the wheel, trying to remember how to breathe like a normal person. Every detail of the moment played on repeat in my head. The tilt of her chin, the way she leaned into him, how at ease she looked. Not guilty, not hesitant, just gone. I drove home without her. She didn't call, didn't text. I don't know if she even realized I wasn't still behind her at the gallery. Maybe she thought I saw and kept walking. Maybe she hoped I did. Or maybe, worst of all, she didn't care. It wasn't until 5 hours later that I heard from her. Lena, where are you? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed. Me, you kissed him. Read receipt. No reply for 10 minutes. Then, Lena, I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I didn't respond. What could I say? That I'd always wondered what betrayal would feel like in its purest form? That watching it in real time, without sound or filter, made something inside me go still? Not angry. Not even hurt. Just done. I didn't sleep that night. I laid on the couch with the lights off, staring at the ceiling. Every hour or so, I'd check my phone, hoping for a different message. Something like, I made a mistake, or even just, I'm sorry. But nothing came. The next morning, she came home. I heard her come through the door, set her bag down, walk slowly into the living room. She stood there, not saying anything at first. I didn't look at her. She sat on the edge of the armchair across from the couch. I didn't plan it, she said. I nodded once, still looking at the ceiling. I didn't know he was going to be there. That made me laugh, quietly. Right. You just picked the one town he happened to show up in. She winced. Okay. I wanted to see him. I just didn't think that I'd be standing 10 feet away. She looked down. The silence grew thick between us. Not angry, just sharp. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. I finally looked at her. You kissed another man while I was still holding your hand. She opened her mouth to say something. Stopped. Closed it. I sat up slowly, feet hitting the floor. I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to throw things or ask for some drawn-out confession. I saw what I saw. And now, I know. She started crying. Quietly. No dramatic sobs. Just tears sliding down a face that looked far too calm. I stood up. You want him? Fine. You already have him. But you don't get to have me too. I walked past her. Into the bedroom. Started packing. She followed me. Please don't do this now. We can talk. Wait. I turned to her. No. You don't get to delay this just because you're uncomfortable. You made your choice in front of a crowd. She didn't argue. She just stood there, arms crossed like she was holding herself together. And I realized something. She hadn't expected to get caught. Not because she was being careful, but because she assumed I'd never stop trusting her long enough to look. And maybe that was my biggest mistake. I moved out 2 days after she kissed him. No long conversations. No therapy ultimatum. No dramatic suitcase scenes. Just a quiet, methodical exit. I found a short-term rental a few miles from work. Sparse furniture. Blank walls. The kind of place that made you feel temporary just by breathing in it. It was perfect. Lena didn't fight me on it. She didn't beg. She didn't chase. She just watched me leave with the same hollow look I'd seen in her eyes the night I caught her smiling at his texts. She sent me one message later that evening. Lena, I'm sorry for how you found out. You didn't deserve that. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply. But there wasn't anything left to say. So I let the message sit there, unopened, a virtual corpse of a conversation we were never going to have. In the days that followed, word got around. I didn't make a show of it. I didn't out her to our friends or spin some story to make myself the victim. I just told the truth when people asked. She met someone else. That was enough. Some friends backed away. Some leaned in. The quietest reactions were always the most honest. People who knew that betrayal doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just the slow undoing of promises. One thread at a time. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because 3 weeks after I left, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Unknown, hi. This is Mark. I sat in the parking lot outside my office, blinking at the screen. For a second I thought it was a joke. But then a second text came through. Mark, I think we should talk. Against my better judgment, I replied. Me? What could we possibly have to talk about? His response came fast. Mark, you don't know everything. I didn't either. Please. One conversation. That's all I'm asking. We met the next day at a neutral spot, quiet bar, early afternoon. He looked more tired than I expected. Gaunt. Like the past few weeks had aged him faster than time should. We sat in a booth by the window. No handshakes. No fake smiles. I wasn't expecting to see you at the cafe, he said. I didn't even know you were together that weekend. Yeah, I said, voice flat. That makes 2 of us. He nodded. Looked down at his drink. I'm not here to defend her. Or myself. What we did was inexcusable. I won't pretend otherwise. Then why am I here? I asked. He sighed. Because I found out something last week. Something she didn't tell you. And she didn't tell me either. Not until after you left. I said nothing. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. She ended things with me. That caught me off guard. When, 5 days ago, he said. No drama. No big talk. She just said she couldn't do it. That she wasn't in love with me. That she never had been. I almost laughed. So what? She destroyed a marriage for a guy she didn't love? He nodded slowly. Yeah. And that's not the part that's going to mess with your head. I stared at him. He took a deep breath. She told me something that makes sense now, but it didn't at the time. She said she was trying to burn down her life. That you were never supposed to find out the way you did. That if anything, she wanted you to hate her enough to let her go. I frowned. What does that even mean? Mark hesitated. She told me she never wanted to be the one who asked for the divorce. She didn't want to look like the bad guy. Said she'd rather destroy it from the inside and have you walk out first. I sat back, the weight of that settling in my chest. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about him. It was about cowardice. She didn't want to end the marriage. She wanted me to do it for her. I was a means to an end, Mark said, like he was ashamed of how long it took him to realize. She used me to shatter the glass, so she wouldn't have to pick up the hammer. It made sense. Too much sense. Every lie, every evasion, every near confession that danced around the truth but never faced it. She wanted me to see it. She just didn't want to say it. Because if I left angry, she could live with herself. If she left first, she'd have to admit she failed at something she spent years convincing the world was perfect. I didn't say much after that. Just sat there, listening to a man I should have hated, but couldn't. Not fully, because we were both used. Just in different ways. Before we parted, he said something else I'll never forget. She told me once that you saw her too clearly, that you looked at her like she was whole, and that made it impossible for her to be broken in peace. That landed harder than anything else, because I had loved her like that, loved her in a way that assumed she was solid, that her silences were just moods, that her pullbacks were temporary. I gave her space instead of questions, trust instead of confrontation, and maybe that's what undid us. Not cheating, not even the kiss, but how long I kept believing in a version of her she was desperate to kill off. I never spoke to Lena again after that. She tried. A few times. Sent me emails. One long letter, handwritten, folded neatly in an envelope I never opened. I still have it, tucked in the back of a drawer I never go into. I don't need to read it, because I already know what it says. I forgive her. Not in the soft, cinematic way people say when they want to feel noble, but in the quiet, practical way of someone who refuses to carry someone else's damage any further. Sometimes people don't cheat because they want someone else. Sometimes they cheat because they want to kill the part of themselves that feels small and unseen, and they don't care who they burn to do it. I see that now, and I see myself clearer, too. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't even always present. But I was real. I showed up. I believed in us long past the expiration date she stamped in secret. That's on her. Everything else, that's on me to heal. And I'm getting there. One honest breath at a time. Thanks for watching. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next confession. Until next time, take care and watch who you trust.